distant and weakly testified to phantoms, are averred to have been seen in various times and climes, but, as Lord Nugent points out, this wonderful story is attested upon the oath of 3 officers, men of honour and discretion, and of 3 other gentlemen of credit, selected by the King as commissioners to report upon these prodigies, and to tranquillize and disabuse the alarms of a country town, adding, moreover, in confirmation the testimony to the identity of several of the illustrious dead, as seen among the unearthly combatants, who had been well known to them and who had fallen in the battle. A well-supported imposture, adds Lord Nugent, or a stormy night on the hillside, might have acted on the weakness of a peasantry, in whose remembrances the terrors of the Edge Hill fight were still fresh. Now, down below it says here, the Battle of Edge Hill, between the forces of the King and those of the Parliament, had been fought about 2 months previous to the first appearance of these apparitions. But it is difficult to imagine how the minds of officers sent there to correct the illusions could have been so imposed upon. It will also be observed that no inference is attempted by the witnesses to assist any notion of a judgment or warning favourable to the interests or passions of their own party. The pamphlet referred to by Lord Nugent was printed immediately after the events it records on the 23rd of January, 1642. It narrates the appearance of the late apparitions and records the particulars of the prodigious noises of war and battle at Edge Hill, near Cainton in Northamptonshire, and its trust is certified to by William Wood, Esquire, and Justice for the Peace for the same county, and Samuel Marshall, preacher of God's word in Cainton, and other persons of quality. Omitting the introductory matter, which merely refers to the antiquity of, and the great mass of evidence in favour of the reality of apparitions, and modernising the spelling, this strongly accredited pamphlet reads thus: Edge Hill, in the very confines of Warwickshire, near unto Cainton, is in Northamptonshire, a place, as appears by the sequel, destined for civil wars and battles, as were King John fought a battle with his barons, and were in defence of the kingdom's laws and liberty, was fought a bloody conflict between his majesties and the Parliament's forces. At this Edge Hill, at the very place where the battle was fought, have since, and doth appear strange and portentous apparitions of 2 jarring and contrary armies, as I shall in order deliver, it being certified by men of most credit in those parts, as William Wood, Esquire, Samuel Marshall, Minister, a sudden, whilst they were in their cognitions, appeared in the air the same incorporeal soldiers that made those clamours, and immediately, with ensigns displayed, drums beating, muskets going off, cannons discharged, horses neighing, which also to these men were visible. The alarum or entrance to this game of death was one army, which gave the first charge, having the king's colours, and the other, the Parliament's, at the head or front of the battle, and so pell-mell to it they went. The battle that appeared to the king's forces seeming at first to have the best, but afterwards to be put into apparent rout, but still 2 or 3 in the morning in equal scale continued this dreadful fight, the clattering of arms, noise of cannons, cries of soldiers, so amazing and terrifying the poor men, that they could not believe they were mortal, or give credit to their eyes and ears. Run away they durst not for fear of being made a prey to these infernal soldiers, and so they, with much fear and affright, stayed to behold the success of the business, which at last suited to this effect. After some 3 hours' fight, that army which carried the king's colours withdrew, or rather appeared to fly. The other remaining, as it were, masters of the field, stayed a good space, triumphing and expressing all the signs of joy and conquest, and then, with all their drums, trumpets, ordnance, and soldiers, vanished. The poor men, glad that they were gone, that had so long stayed them, there against their wills, made with all haste to Gainton, and there knocking up Mr. Wood, a justice of peace, who called up his neighbour, Mr. Marshall, the minister, they gave them an account of the whole passage, and averred it upon their oaths to be true, at which affirmation of theirs, being much amazed, they should hardly have given credit to it, but would have conjectured the men to have been either mad or drunk, but they not known some of them to have been of approved integrity, and so, suspending their judgments till the next night, about the same hour, they with the same men, and all the substantial inhabitants of that and the neighbouring parishes drew thither, were, about half an hour after their arrival on Sunday, being Christmas night, appeared in the same tumultuous warlike manner, the same 2 adverse armies, fighting with as much spite and spleen as formerly, and so departed the gentlemen and all the spectators, much terrified with these visions of horror, withdrew themselves to their houses, beseeching God to defend them from those hellish and prodigious enemies. The next night they appeared not, nor all that week, so that the dwellers thereabout were in good hope that they had for ever departed. But on the ensuing Saturday night, in the same place, and at the same hour, they were again seen with far greater tumult, fighting in the manner aforementioned, for 4 hours, or very near, and then vanished, appearing again on Sunday night, and performing the same actions of hostility and bloodshed, so that Mr. Wood and others, whose faith it should seem was not strong and so successively the next Saturday and Sunday the same tumults and prodigious sights and actions were put in the state and condition they were formerly. The rumour whereof coming to his Majesty at Oxford, he immediately dispatched thither Colonel Lewis Kirk, Captain Dudley, Captain Wainman, and 3 other gentlemen of credit, to take full view and notice of this said business, who, at first hearing of the true attestation and relation of Mr. Marshall and others, stayed there till the Saturday night following, wherein they heard and saw the forementioned prodigies, and so on Sunday, distinctly knowing divers of the apparitions, or incorporeal substances, by their faces, as that of Sir Edmund Varney, and others that were there slain, of which upon oath they made testimony to his Majesty. What this doth portend, God only knoweth, and time perhaps will discover. But doubtlessly it is a sign of his wrath against this land for these civil wars, which he in his good time finish and send a sudden peace between his Majesty and Parliament. So let us read something about Edinburgh. In Scotland, of course, this is Canongate. About the beginning of the 18th century stood a grand mansion near the head of the Canongate, the site of which now, however, is covered with buildings of a very different character. With this old mansion is connected a tale of terror, the circumstances of which were well known and talked about no longer ago than the beginning of the present century. A friend of Sir Walter Scott, in whose early life the story was still current, furnished him with the account from which the following version of the tradition is derived. At the period referred to, a divine of great sanctity was summoned in the middle of a certain night to come and pray with a person at the point of death. This was no unusual summons, but the consequences which followed were very terrifying. He was forced into a sedan chair, and after having been carried for a considerable distance, was set down in a remote part of the city, where, at the muzzle of a cocked pistol, he was compelled to submit to being blindfolded. In the course of the discussion which his remonstrances caused, he heard enough, and indeed saw enough, of their garb to make him conjecture and seeming to approach the fatal spot, there was a good deal of anxiety testified, lest the apparition should make good her denunciation. So I hope you enjoyed those short readings. I will do some more for you very soon. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers saying I shall see